Şimdi sevgili Tostitler, Hellblade'in sizlerle beraber bir Hellblade filmi varmış. Bak ben bunu izlememiştim. Düşünün yani 1,5 yıldır bu oyunu oynuyorum ama izlemiyorum. Sizlerle beraber şunun bir filmini izleyelim. Oyunun gidişatına ilgili bilgiler izlendirmekte diyor. Kısa bir şey herhalde. Oluyor lan. Ben bu sahneyi oynamıştım ha. Oyunun tam ortalarından bir sahne bura.
Believe that Senua'S reality is twisted. You must accept that yours might be too.
Sahne tekrardan gözümün önüne geldi. Abi gerçekten çok korkunç bir sahneydi ya.
Hellblade: Senua'S Sacrifice is a video game about Senua, a Celtic warrior on a vision quest into Viking territory. But what sets our hero Senua apart is that she suffers from severe psychotic mental illness.
Karakterimiz biraz deli demeye çalışıyor yani burada.
The original idea for Hellblade was to create a classic hero's journey, a journey of suffering, but one where the fantasy world is not another planet or alternate universe, but a world that is constructed in Senua's mind. But to do so would mean putting psychotic mental illness at the center of the experience, a subject that is still considered taboo, and a challenge that was both terrifying and exciting in equal measure. In Hellblade, the starting point was a newly discovered Celtic goddess called Senua in Ashwell, Hertfordshire. When first discovered, her name was thought to be Senua, a name which I liked and kept. I wondered if Senua might have been a Celtic warrior like Boudica who stood up to the Romans. While the Romans had conquered all of Europe, there was a group of Celts up in the furthest reaches of the Roman Empire that could not be conquered, the Picts. And so the Romans built a wall, called Hadrian's Wall, that spans across Britain from sea to sea to keep the Pictish barbarians at bay. The Picts were known for their war paint, painted on with woad, and their matted hair clumped with woad. And so Senua would be a barbarian Pict in this image.
What's your name?
Senua.
I haven't seen you before.
I don't live home much.
Oh, Zeno's daughter.
Vay be, zamanında bunlar barbardı.
Orkney is off the
Şimdi
coast
krallar ha.
and was inhabited by the Picts, steeped in history and mystery, and so I made Orkney Senua's home and set the stage for a crisis. In the late 8th century, the first Vikings landed on the Orkney Islands, the population of the Pict after, replaced by the Norsemen of the 9th century. Were they wiped out? We don't know for sure, but it would seem likely given the reputation of the Vikings. The Northmen's brutality is legendary. High-ranking leaders and chieftains of the tribes they conquered were often offered as sacrifice to their gods. The most brutal of these sacrifices was known as the Blood Eagle. I imagine Senua as a young female warrior who returns home from exile to find her partner, Dillion, brutally sacrificed to a Norse god by these hellish warriors from a faraway land. I imagine the horror of this moment and how it would have dragged her deep into mental torment.
Oyuna ilk başlamadan önce bunları görseydim daha anlamlı olabilirdi benim için. Ya bu kuzey barbarları falan olduğunu oyunun içinde zaten bir nebze anlıyorsunuz ama buradan izlemek de ayrı bir keyifli oluyor yani buradan görmek.
I came to learn that the Celts had a sophisticated and nuanced perspective on the nature of mental disorder. One term they used was gelt. A Gelt is a man or woman who has been driven mad by a curse, battle trauma, or grief. The Gelt would take to in the woods in search of penance, punishment, and purgation. And so Senua became
O şeyi oyunda hatırladım, onu arkasında karga sırtını deşiyordu abi, yiyordu.
Another word the Celts used in reference to mental disorders was truth, meaning fool, or one who utters the words of God. They tell of the mad sinner who flees battle into exile and takes on a beastly nature, growing feathers on his body. The character called Truth in Hellblade is based on a little-known person called Findan, an 8th century Irish Celt who was captured and enslaved by the Vikings, but eventually escaped to Orkney where he became a monk.
I will tell you my stories of hell, if I may walk with you.
Upon meeting Senua, it would be his stories that fuel her quest deep into their world of gods.
The Northmen say the world will come to an end. The sun will grow black, the earth will sink into the sea, the stars will disappear, fire and water will meet, flames will play against the sky, the heavens and earth and all the world will be burned, all the gods will be dead, and the warriors of Valhalla and people everywhere.
O sahneyi görmemiştim. O kurt gibi bir şeyin atladığı sahneyi görmedim daha.
For it is nigh.
So the stage was set for a new adventure, a journey into the Norse underworld called Hell, a vision quest fueled by madness and myth, a fantasy that was created by Senua'S own mind, and one that we would experience through her eyes.
This is your mission. This is your quest. There is nothing else left.
To make
Bu sahne böyle yapıldı demek.
mental illness as its central theme was fraught with danger. Mental illness, such as psychosis, is still taboo and rarely acknowledged in a century of cinema, never mind the new medium of games. Where it does feature, it often conflates psychosis and psychopathy associated with a lack of empathy. It is unfortunate that these two words sound so similar that they are used interchangeably in media. I must admit that I didn't have to look very far to discover my own ignorance of the subject. So we reached out to Paul Fletcher, psychiatrist and professor of health neuroscience at University of Cambridge.
Psychosis is a descriptive term, and it refers to having a loss of contact with objective reality. So it's characterized by two main sets of symptoms. One of them is hallucinations, where somebody experiences perceptions when there is no actual objective thing out there to perceive.
Who are you?
And the other is delusions, where somebody comes to very often bizarre, unpleasant, frightening beliefs when there's no good evidence in favor of them.
There's no doubt about it. The source of the darkness is in Helheim.
Adamlar sonuçta profesörle çalışmışlar ve bu durumu nasıl açıklayabiliriz, nasıl yapabiliriz diye öğrenmişler yani.
Biomedical research charity that spends billions on research and awareness programs aimed at improving health.
Mental health hasn't always been presented in the media in a way.
Vay be, bununla alakalı bir de kuruluş varmış, onunla çalışmışlar.
Subject matter, and there are a lot of preconceived ideas about mental health, and particularly schizophrenia and psychosis. So we hope our support allows the team to continue to collaborate with Paul Fletcher and with those who have experience of psychosis to create a game that provides a fresh perspective on the condition and allows audiences to engage with it in a way that just wouldn't be possible in any other medium.
What started out as a brief consultation convinced me that we were only scratching the surface of an immensely deep and interesting subject that could enrich and change the very nature of the game.
That's cool. Thanks so much for coming. Pleasure. Thanks. It's really interesting for me. I'd love to be involved. It's fascinating.
Our understanding of psychosis is still very much a mystery, and ways of treating it are still primitive compared to physical illness. After all, it is easy to see the pain and suffering caused by physical diseases or physical trauma. It is not so easy to see the mental suffering and trauma of severe mental illness. But what if we could find a way to see it? Games are capable of drawing you in for hours on end, playing the role of a character who is different from you, experiencing their perspective, and actively involving you in a world that functions with a different set of rules. If we were to represent Senua'S psychosis, we would have to simulate voice hearing, a common attribute. But how can we simulate something we have no first-hand experience of? Professor Charles Fernyhough, a leading expert in voice hearing from Durham University, offered his help.
Hearing voices is an experience that is usually associated with severe mental illness, and crucially we know that hearing voices is a part of ordinary life for many people who don't meet the criteria for mental illness.
Yeah. Oh, that's not him in real life.
We know voices vary according to where they appear.
Sesleri sadece duyuyor değil
Voices
mi?
can appear far away in the distance, they can appear right there in your ear, they can seem to be coming from
Ha,
inside your
üretiyor
head.
sesleri.
Based on the information Professor Fernie Ho provided, I put together a sound brief and invited some actors to the studio.
Biri konuşuyor, biri konuşuyor. Oyunun içindeki olay bu.
Which records the 3D spatial position of sound, replicating the way sound is heard by human ears. It gives you an incredible sense that the person you are listening to is right there beside you.
Demek böyle yapılmış ha.
Rachel Waddingham from the Voice Collective came to our studio with two young
Abi çok
voice
üst düzey bir
heroes to
emek
speak to
ya.
our
Biz
team.
oynayıp geçiyoruz ama.
We talked at length about their experiences and they listened to our tests, giving us feedback on how we could improve on it.
Everyone hates her. She's cursed.
It's very hard to represent what this experience is like, partly because it's such a personal, intense, emotional experience. It's testament to how Ninja Theory have been listening to what the researchers are saying, but also crucially listening to the experts by experience. What they've come up with is so compelling. It's by far the best representation I've heard of what these experiences are like.
Other common attributes of psychosis are visions and flashbacks. We met with Recovery College East, who work with and care for people recovering from severe mental disorders. A group of service users gave us their first-hand account of what they experience.
Sometimes when the vision or what we're seeing is too much, we become small until eventually we perhaps don't see anything.
The people we spoke to, the stories they told, were fascinating, harrowing and mind-boggling. The reality of what people experienced was vivid, far exceeding what I could possibly have imagined. We went away itching to represent some of these visions and flashbacks in the game.
As we all know, my heart is so, love is so far away. Don't you know how I wanna feel deeper? I could never know how you grow, all these days are killing me.
Buraları anlamıyorum ya.
Now I see deep in me insanity does unfold. I just wanna feel deeper, deeper. I just wanna feel deeper.
Işıklandırmayı falan dedi burada. Yanlış anlamadıysam. Üf, bu sahne de çok iyiydi. Nereye bulurlamışlar? Ha, burası. Şu odaklanma olayları, resim bulma olayları çok zordu oyunda ki hala zor benim için. Ama yine de keyifli.
To refine our work, we continue to hold meetings with Recovery College East over the course of a year and a half, showing them what we had achieved so far and refining the in-game representations based on their feedback. With their help, flashbacks, visions and changes in perception were woven into the story and gameplay of Senua.
The students that are involved in this project are incredibly excited about being involved. They have described the experience as being important because it values their lived experience and shows that despite what we have been through, all of that experience becomes valid, that actually it's something that we should all be talking about.
The experiences described range from beautiful to frightening beyond comprehension. I heard of a girl who has to live with an angry voice screaming at her, slamming on her doors and walls 24 hours a day. I met someone who would often see hanging corpses in a room, so real that she would sometimes try to rescue them. The panic and fear that comes with
Aa,
such
bu haritada
visions
bu kadar
is
yanlarından
entirely
geçebiliyor
understandable,
muyduk?
and it can be a living horror for some.
Worthless, weak, pathetic. Go on, feel sorry for yourself, because there's no one left to do that for you.
I was urged by one fellow that we should
Ben
not
bayağı
shy away
uzaklarından
from
geçmiştim
showing this
korktuğum
horror.
için o haritada.
So I was perpetually torn in making Hellblade. Had we gone too far with our representations or not far enough?
Broken and lost. Just like your soul.
Broken and Lost diyor. Kır ve kaybetme diyor, öyle bir şey.
In some ways, voice hearing and visions were the
Amına
low-hanging
koyayım.
fruit, so to speak. There's another aspect of psychosis that is much harder to explain.
Bak,
but one that
burada
I
kayboluyordu.
think is
Anasının
uniquely
amına
able
koyayım.
to
Buralar var ya,
represent
beni
what are often
çıldırttı
called
ya.
delusions.
People begin to see patterns in the world. They begin to link things that most people wouldn't link. Most of the things that we might think would be coincidence or, you know,
Beni
not
çıldırtan
worth
mapler
commenting on.
bunlar.
Nevertheless, that might have a particular salience or importance for them.
One individual described how
Bak,
everyday
burada
words,
geliyorsunuz,
nouns,
merdiven oluyor
colours,
anasını
and
satayım.
objects were steeped in meanings.
Çok güzel yapmışlardı ya. Yapboz gibi bir oyun. Oralar bir tık saçmaydı yani. Tahtayı
It's
buluyoruz.
not just brain dysfunction. It's not like the system shut down. It's actually an incredibly creative process. The person creates a world populated with voices and phantasms and terrors, and they're completely immersed in it. They believe in it.
We often invite people into the studio to play the game. In one of our playtests, they played through much of the game, making associations between runes, secret messages, and the threat of darkness that stalked them. There are many things that happen in the world of Hellblade that make perfect sense within the context of Senua'S mind. The dark rot that's killing her slowly from within, the secret runes of the gods that block her path to Helheim, and strange associations that exist in the game to confuse you. To complete Senua'S quest, you have to internalize and accept the logic and meaning behind these things to progress. Afterwards, they said that they didn't see much evidence of mental illness in the game. People with delusions of all sorts would argue the same thing, that they are not aware of their experience being abnormal in any way.
I need this sword. It's important.
Representing perception changes and thinking patterns within Hellblade gives us a set of symptoms common in psychosis. But people with lived experience were keen to emphasize another point, that it is wrong to define a person by their symptoms. Quite often, the illness comes not from the symptoms, but from the stigma, isolation, and mistreatment that comes about from the rest of society.
They say that I'm cursed.
Adamlar bayağı psikolojinin dibine girmişler. Bu şekilde yani bu oyun ortaya çıkmış
I needed
gerçekten.
someone to portray Senua, someone who could believably internalize her suffering.
Buralar gerçekten oynanan sahneler herhalde. Öyle bir şey olmalı.
Over a few months while we perfected our motion capture techniques. Without realizing it, she had already auditioned for the role, and I knew her well enough to know that I didn't have to teach her to act, but to relive her own internal pain. As often is the case, those who have suffered mental anguish are never far from us. My hope is that by creating a compelling and aspirational character in Senua who
Ya
feels
şu an
very
izlediğimiz
much
şeyin
real, albeit in a
oluşması
fantasy
aynı bir
setting, we can provide a lens
Avatar
into
filmi
reality
sahnesi
that
izliyormuş
people
gibi
want to
yani.
use. And this is where
Sahne
storytelling
arkasını
comes
izliyormuş
into
gibi.
play. I imagined her life based on common threads in real people's lives. She was always prone to psychosis as a child. Her mother Galina also heard voices and had visions, so perhaps there was a genetic aspect. Or perhaps it was cultural, as she lived within a world without science, of gods and a superstition, as exemplified by her druid father Zimbal. Psychosis developed in her late teens to early 20s and was exacerbated by stigma and isolation at the hands of the clansmen and her father.
This darkness. It's spreading.
Senua'nın aslında bulunduğu klandan boydan gönderilen kişi, yani atılan kişi yani.
The darkness. So the question is, what Senua experiences real? Can only be answered by saying, yes, it is real. It is her reality.
All of her suffering will have been for nothing. It's just a matter of time.
Towards the end of the project, service users and professionals that had collaborated with us were invited to see the near final game. It was a chance to see if the game had reflected their views or if it had misrepresented them.
For me, being involved in especially developing Senua'S character has been really important, and being able to bring in my perspective and what I see and what I hear, and having that built into the game has been a real privilege. It's gritty and it's meaty, and there are some tough subjects in there that are being tackled with honesty.
I was blown away by it today, absolutely blown away. It was just fantastic to get the opportunity to use our lived experience in a very creative way. There's nothing tokenistic about the work we've put in. It feels like we've been listened to, things have been taken on board, and I think there was a lot of realism in the game itself, and it feels very authentic.
Ya zaten özgün bir oyun o konuda da.
Hellblade will give people a good experience of what it's like to hear voices and have those experiences. I'm glad that the guys at Ninja Theory have asked us to come along and help them build an experience that's positive.
Ya denettikleri uzmanlar bile bir kopyasını alıp deneyeceğim falan diyor, yani böyle adamlara hediye vermiyorlar herhalde.
How the conversations have translated into the game in a way that I think I didn't imagine was possible. So wonderful, really wonderful.
Çok hoşlarına gitmiş belli ya. Ben bu kafayı hala çözemedim. Bu Dillian'ın kafası mı? Onu da bilmiyorum bu arada. Dillian'ın kafası olabilir o.
And use the power of something like a video game to change people's perceptions, to increase understanding, and ultimately to make some of the stigma around voice hearing and other experiences go away.
For me, it was really exciting to see something that I explore scientifically being represented so beautifully in a character who's trying to penetrate the mysteries of the environment in which they've been placed, with all of this strange uncertainty and noise and conflicting information that they're getting. I'm very excited by this way of trying to represent mental illness, because I think it actually might be offering us insights.
Fikir veren adamların bile hoşuna gittiği için gayet güzel olmuş diyor haliyle. Ya ben ne kadar oynarken korksam da
Mental illness has been with us for as long as we have been on this planet.
Bu harita çok boktan bir haritaydı ya. Çıldırttı beni bu harita. Korkudan ilerleyememiştim orada.
It assumes that being and thinking differently is a weakness. The only reason we have computers, spacecraft, medicine, poetry, art, and yes, even video games is because individuals are able to simulate new abstract realities in their minds and share them with the rest of us. We need people to be willing to see differently in order for us to progress and survive as society. And we need to be open to these new ways of seeing. And it is this spirit that motivated me to create Senua'S story and share it with you.
İşte arkasında böyle büyük bir ekip, bu kadar fikirlerini paylaşan değerli insanlar falan var. Öyle basit bir şekilde ortaya çıkmış bir şey olmadığında bugün sizlerle beraber izleyip görmüş oldum abi. Ben bu Hellblade filmini izlememiştim. Sadece oyununu oynuyordum. Hala da bitiremedim gerçi. Bunu izlediğim, gördüğüm iyi oldu. O arkadaki emeği görmüş olduk. Gerçekten.